He had always believed that control was the cornerstone of life. Every decision he made, every milestone he reached, was measured against how much power and stability it brought him. By the age of 35, he had amassed wealth most people only read about in magazines. Boardrooms trembled when he spoke, stocks rose at his bidding, and accolades hung like medals on every wall of his penthouse. Outsiders called him extraordinary. Insiders called him But despite all the money, prestige, and influence, there was one place his carefully crafted control could never reach. His family. He had married young, or at least younger than most billionaires did. She wasn't wealthy, she wasn't glamorous, and she wasn't part of any social circuit worth naming. She was quiet, gentle, someone who saw beauty in ordinary things, the way sunlight slanted through old trees, the smell of coffee brewing in the morning, the laughter of people who loved without reservation. He had noticed her once, early in his career, before he had capitalized on the fortunes he now commanded. She had made him feel like there was a world outside success. For a while it was enough to balance him, to remind him that money was a means, not a measure of life. When their daughter was born, the first thing he did was start planning her future. Best schools, tutors, travel, every advantage he had ever dreamed of giving to a child. She would never do without anything he ever wanted her to have, but in his mind, that required that everything remain in perfect order. His wife, radiant after childbirth, smiled at him with love that felt unearned. But she believed in his promise that their life together would be perfect. Reality proved messier. Within weeks of their daughter's birth, he plunged back into the world that defined him. Deals that couldn't fail, meetings that altered markets, dinners with clients who rearranged entire industries with a handshake. They all pulled at him relentlessly. His wife had asked him to stay a little longer at home, to help in the mornings, to share diaper changes, to taste the milk she expressed and still hoped would suffice just a bit longer. He had promised he would be there. He was a man of his word in business. In love, perhaps he had misread what that meant. He left her with a nanny, someone professional, someone trustworthy, someone who could take care of the everyday while he took care of the extraordinary. That was the luxury he gave his family, outsourcing the simple tasks so he could handle the complex ones. It seemed reasonable then. The years passed in that rhythm, early mornings slipping out of bed while she held their daughter, evenings spent answering business calls in the bathroom, weekends interrupted by urgent messages. And in all that, he never heard the small sounds that eventually turned into silence when he walked in unannounced that afternoon. His mind was occupied with profit margins, market shifts, and the midday briefing he had skipped for being unnecessary. He opened the front door, shoulders squared with confidence. The laughter of a child echoed somewhere deeper in the house. His eyes narrowed in curiosity. He took another step, slower now, instinct stirring in him like an alarm. He heard a lullaby. Before he saw her, something softly hummed, familiar, tender. He moved down the hallway, every instinct as sharp as a blade, until he reached the living room, and then he stopped. There she was, the nanny, in the simple dress of her ordinary work, holding his daughter in her arms. But she wasn't doing what he expected. His daughter was nestled close to the nanny's chest, eyes half closed, breathing easy. The nanny was breastfeeding her. His heart didn't know whether to pound or crumble. For a moment, all the arrogance and certainty that had defined him stilled inside him like the eye of a storm. He blinked, he looked up. The nanny's eyes met his with a steady calm, not the startled fear he anticipated, just a serene confidence that felt like truth striking him squarely in the chest. She didn't flinch. She didn't break the embrace. He remembered something his own mother had once said about people, that when they showed you their humanity, you didn't turn away from it. But he had always been good at turning away from discomfort. What? His voice came out rough, unfamiliar. Why? Words tangled in his throat. The nanny didn't look at him with accusation, or defensiveness, or embarrassment. Her voice was gentle, honest. She was crying, and she needed comfort. The milk I had brought with me wasn't enough. I asked her mother what helps her settle when she cries. Your wife told me once that being close like this always soothed. Harry stood in silence. The air felt heavy with all the moments he had missed, the mornings he'd left before her first smile, the evenings he'd returned after her first giggle, the nights he'd been too preoccupied with charts to hear her small cries in the monitor. Now he saw in a single instant how much warmth and safety there was in this simple act of care, and how much of that he had surrendered to convenience. Before he could pull himself together, the nanny rose slowly. She took his daughter inside a blanket, careful and respectful. She wasn't ashamed, she was just doing what love required in that moment. But he felt shame in her stare, a collision of pride and regret that left his insides trembling. He realized then that his life had been a series of huge achievements and small absences, and at the end of it all, the echoes of what he neglected spoke louder than any applause. He walked forward without thinking, guided by something raw and immediate. In him, he took his daughter from the nanny's arms, holding her clumsy and warm against his chest. She looked at him with eyes so clear and trusting that he felt like he could sever his own breath just by grasping her in his arms. The nanny met his gaze then, and he saw no judgment, just a reflective calm that reminded him of all that he had chosen not to see. "She needs love," she said simply. "Not perfection." He wanted to argue with her, to explain that he'd been trying to give love in his own way, but the words lodged in his throat. It was true, he had been giving everything but what his family needed most. "Presents, thank you," he said, not really knowing what else to do. She nodded and left him there with his daughter in his arms and 1,000 thoughts crashing against the edges of all he believed. The days passed in a blur of reflection. He looked at his daughter and saw a life he had almost watched slip through his grasp. He thought of his wife, of the small moments he had traded for meetings and memos, the mornings he hadn't kissed goodbye, the evenings she had waited for him to finally come home and listen. He realized he had been building walls around his heart with the bricks of ambition, never noticing that life was most alive in the spaces between those bricks. He found her in their room, sitting on the bed, looking older than the last time he really saw her. Her eyes told him she had been through more than he'd ever known: quiet sacrifices, long nights alone, the weight of responsibility he had never grasped. He approached her slowly, as though fear might shatter the fragile thing between them. "Can we talk?" he asked softly. She didn't look at him at first. She folded a blanket over their daughter's crib with careful tenderness. Finally, she met his gaze, and in that look, he saw both the hurt of absence and the strength of keeping the family alive without him. He didn't offer excuses. He started with truth, the way his heart twisted when he saw her with their daughter, the way he realized how little he had truly understood about love. He told her how he wanted to change, how he was ready to relinquish the iron grip of control and make space for the simpler truths of life. She listened, quiet and composed, but he felt the weight of every long night and empty morning he had failed to witness. She didn't answer right away. Her silence was a kind of presence, not cold, but thoughtful. Then she reached for his hand, her fingers gentle in his. "Love isn't measured in meetings or success," she said. "Love is shown in the moments we choose to be here." And in that moment he felt his heart shatter into something honest and open for the first time in years. He made changes that rippled through their lives. He restructured his priorities, stepping back from the workaholic pursuit that had consumed him. He learned to make breakfast. He changed diapers, sang lullabies he once thought silly, and held his daughter close when she woke in the night. He learned patience and presence, and the significance of existence without trophies. The nanny became someone he never forgot, not as a stranger, but as someone who gently reminded him what love looked like when it required nothing more than care and courage. She didn't own the place he had lost. She just held what needed holding until he woke up to life. And his wife, they spoke of forgiveness and of rebuilding trust, not with grand gestures, but with small, daily commitments. They didn't rush. They didn't pretend nothing had happened. They simply chose to walk forward together, discovering the quiet joy of ordinary life that once seemed too simple for a man who thought only big victories mattered. His daughter grew strong and curious, with eyes that mirrored her mother's, gentleness and a smile that softened his heart every day. And every time he held her, he remembered the moment that changed him, the day he saw love not as something to control, but as something to cherish and protect with his very soul. Please like, share and subscribe. Sky. We share stories the world needs to feel again.